The most fundamental job of government is to take care of and protect the people. Everything the government does, building roads, school parks and hospitals, ensuring the safety of goods that are produced, making sure that cars are safe to drive, taking drastic measures to stop the spread of disease and infection, has the singular and primary intention to remove harm from the people. The most critical issue that we face as a nation is a failure to properly account for the millions of citizens living in or near the state of poverty. When the government announced the MCO, so many of our people had little or no savings and were living on the wages that earned day to day and week to week. In August 2019, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, Philip Alston, published the findings of his visit to Malaysia, in which he questioned the basic premise of the government's claim that poverty in Malaysia was experienced by less than 1% of the people. He said that this number was inconceivable, as anyone who just spent time walking around Kuala Lumpur could see so many thousands of families which were facing the dire circumstances. This is not even including the poor and forgotten people throughout the country and in Sabah and Sarawak. According to a study by renowned local professor Fatimah Kari, poverty must be assessed using multiple dimensions of deprivation, provides a comprehensive picture of poverty. No single factor like income or any monetary-based indicator is uniquely able to capture all of the factors that contribute to poverty. Her findings reveal a shocking reality that 84% of EPF retirees were identified as multi-dimensionally poor, meaning that they are in acute poverty. Her results also show that women are more multi-dimensionally poor compared to men in terms of transportation, income, home ownership, and education. She also discovered that Indian retirees are more deprived than other ethnic groups, followed by the Malays. In this regard, it is necessary to strengthen current retirement savings institutions to reduce the impact of the retirement crisis. The government needs to provide a social security system that rolls back the decline of Malaysia's retirement savings. And it is also for this reason that we strongly objected to the PN government's policy to allow Malaysians to withdraw their EPF retirement savings during the MCO. This is a regressive policy which punishes the precarious underclass at a time when they are most vulnerable. I've also questioned the government's calculation of poverty figures. For the brief time PH held power, there was some effort by the government to revise its methodology so that the government accepts a proper understanding of the extent of the poverty in the country and develop policies to address it. In the past, whenever the poverty figures are challenged, the government in power will announce a new index, Relative Poverty Index, Multidimensional Poverty Index. In the end, the government prefers to underestimate the problem of poverty and as a result, fails to develop policies that address the root causes of poverty in Malaysia. In September 2019, through the Parliamentary Caucus on Reform and Governance, I sought to highlight the issue of poverty in Malaysia. We invited economist Professor Jomo Kwame Sundram, Professor Raja Rasia, and earlier Professor Edmund Terence Gomez to give their views to lawmakers on how to focus the government's efforts in solving this problem. As a result of this bipartisan effort, we compelled the government to consider revising its approach. What the government does to address poverty if it believes there are 1 million poor people in the country versus 6 million poor people in the country is significant. If the problem is as small as the old calculation suggests, then poverty is something which is not a priority and the government can allocate spending to other areas. Instead, if we as a nation accept that there are there may be as many as 6 to 10 million people in Malaysia living in or near poverty, including in particular the Malays and Bumiputras of Sabah and Sarawak, that the government's decisions on how to allocate resources for social safety net, healthcare, education and infrastructure will be vastly different. I would argue that for a middle-income country rich in natural resources, our problem of poverty should be a national crisis and not just something which needs to be considered. It needs to be prioritized. If we are real about the data, then we would not be able to take credit for eradicating poverty. On the contrary, we would have to take a long, hard look about why, after 60 years of independence and after 4 decades of income redistribution policies, do we still have a poverty rate which is as high and which affects all, particularly the Malays and Bumiputras of Sabah and Sarawak. We have to proceed in a positive manner, but we cannot be blind to the challenges ahead. The PN government, when it came to power, claimed that it was necessary to replace PH in order to save the Malays. They argued that under PH, the Malays would suffer, be humiliated, and ultimately lose their place in this country. What has they done since March to defend the Malays? They have only assembled a bloated cabinet which will cost the country an additional 7.6 million ringgit per year. They have placed members of parliament who already earn a generous allowances as directors in the GLCs, where they take jobs away from qualified professionals, including Malays, and can increase their personal earnings by as much as 10,000 ringgit. The coalition comprised of the same party responsible for squandering billions worth of Bumiputra shares, unaccounted for, and this need to be explained. They need to explain why hundreds and thousands of Malay reserve land has disappeared. And if this can be explained and resolved, there's no point in repeating the mantra or being savior of the Malays when you are part and parcel of the group and the ruling clique that have squandered billions from them in the name of saving the plight of the Malays. My position is implicit in this, that our concern is to protect the vast majority of the poor or relatively poorer Malays, including the Chinese, Indians, Sabahans and Sarawakians. Our recovery cannot simply be measured in terms of our GDP growth. This would only repeat mistakes of the past and the experience of other countries. The recovery has to be measured holistically so that Malaysia emerges stronger and more resilient. What is the income gap between the rich and the poor? Is it expanding or contracting? What is the employment level of Malaysian youth? How successful are our SME businesses? Ultimately, this is not just a question of economists for economists to consider. Economists do not formulate policies in a vacuum. In Malaysia, it is politicians who adopt and implement or not. Ultimately, this is not just a question for economists to consider. Economists do not formulate policies in a vacuum. In Malaysia, it is the politicians who adopt or not these policies. Politicians need to have their act together. They need to show up to Parliament and discuss and debate laws which would determine the course of the nation for the coming years and decades. Instead, politicians are hiding from Parliament, making decisions behind closed doors with no transparency. At the same time, they are harassing the media, interfering in JLCs, returning us to a period of darkness which landed us in this mess in the first place. We need leadership which unites and which inspires and which can lead the nation forward to a more prosperous and peaceful Malaysia. We need leadership which unites and inspires and which can lead the nation forward to a more prosperous and peaceful future. Thank you.